On May 2nd, 2011, SEAL Team 6 entered the compound of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The mission was simple: locate the target, neutralize him, collect intelligence, leave before sunrise. The world knows that part of the story. But during the final minutes inside that compound, a team assigned to secure documents entered a room on the second floor that was never mentioned in the official report. Inside that room were 7 metal filing cabinets. Inside those cabinets were files labeled in English. Some dated back to the early 1900s. Others contained satellite images of government buildings around the world. Each image had a date written beneath it. Future dates, 16 of them. At the time, those dates had not happened yet. Over the next 13 years, every single one of those events occurred on the exact day written in that room. 16 out of 16. The files were taken before the team left Afghanistan. The camera used to document the room was confiscated. Official records show nothing unusual was recovered. Architectural surveys later claimed the room was normal size, 12 feet by 14 feet. But the men who entered it remember something different. The room was larger than the building allowed. The air inside felt sealed, and the silence did not feel empty. It felt aware. This is the part of Operation Neptune's Spear that was never included in the official record. The file is open, and this is what was found inside that room. Welcome to the archive. Inside these records are missions that were carried out in silence. Some were declassified, some were summarized for the public, and some were simplified so they would not raise more questions than answers. This file is different. The file is open. Most people think war is loud. They imagine gunfire, explosions, shouting over radios. They imagine helicopters cutting through the night sky. And yes, those sounds are real. But the men who were there will tell you something else. What stays with you is not the noise, it's the silence. The silence inside a building once the objective is complete. The silence on the flight back. The silence years later when a memory returns without warning. On May 2nd, 2011, Chief Petty Officer Mark Ellison was part of SEAL Team 6 during Operation Neptune's Spear, the raid on a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The world knows how that mission ended. 2 helicopters entered Pakistani airspace. 1 crashed inside the compound walls. The target was located and neutralized. The team secured intelligence and extracted. That is the official version. It is clean. It is direct. It fits on a timeline. But during the final minutes inside that compound, during what operators call the exploitation phase, something else was discovered. Something that did not fit the structure of the building. Something that did not match the mission. Something that was not included in the public record. Some of it was taken away before the team left Afghanistan. Some of it was sealed above their clearance. And some of it was quietly erased. Officially, it does not exist. But the men who stepped into that room remember it clearly. And some things found that night were never meant to be discussed. The official story has been told many times. In the early hours of May 2nd, 2011, 2 modified Black Hawk helicopters crossed into Pakistani airspace. Their objective was clear. A high-value target had been located inside a compound in Abbottabad. The mission was precise, fast, controlled. As the first helicopter entered the compound's airspace, something went wrong. The high walls and tight space created unstable air. The aircraft lost lift and went down inside the courtyard. It was not a catastrophic crash, but it was not planned. Even so, the team adapted. That is what they trained for. The second helicopter landed outside the compound as intended. Operators moved quickly. They breached the outer wall. They cleared the lower floors. Resistance was brief and contained. Within minutes, the target was located on the upper level of the main building. He was identified. He was neutralized. After that, the mission shifted into what operators call exploitation. That phase is simple in theory. Secure documents, collect hard drives, photograph everything before touching it, preserve intelligence that could prevent future attacks. The team moved with discipline. Bags were filled, devices were seized, materials were documented. Meanwhile, demolition charges were prepared on the downed helicopter. Sensitive technology could not be left behind. Less than an hour after entering the compound, the team was airborne again. A backup Chinook lifted them out. The damaged Black Hawk was destroyed in a controlled explosion. By sunrise, the operation was complete. The official timeline shows efficiency, precision, success. It shows a mission executed exactly as it was trained. That is the version written in reports. But what the reports do not describe is what happened inside one specific room on the second floor during the final minutes of exploitation. That part never made it into the summary. Once the outer wall was breached, the team moved the way they always did. Controlled, direct, disciplined. There was no shouting, no wasted motion. Each man knew his sector. Each step had been rehearsed dozens of times in training facilities built to match the compound's layout. The floor plan had been studied for weeks. Every doorway, every stairwell, every blind corner was already familiar. The crash of the first helicopter had taken away the element of surprise. That much was clear, but surprise is only one advantage. Discipline is another. The first floor was cleared quickly, short bursts of movement, quick identifications, rooms secured one by one, non-combatants separated, threats neutralized, communication stayed calm. Clear. Moving. Hold. The words were quiet but sharp. Outside, the rotors of the damaged helicopter were still winding down. The metal clicked and cooled in the night air. Somewhere beyond the walls, dogs should have been barking. Generators should have been humming. A neighborhood should have been reacting to the noise. But once the team crossed the threshold into the main building, something changed. The sound dropped. Not completely, not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to notice. The outside noise felt distant, muffled, like it was happening through thick glass. Boots against the floor sounded softer than they should have. Radio transmissions came through clearly, but the voices carried a strange flatness. There was no echo in the hallways, no natural bounce of sound from concrete walls. It felt contained, as if the building were sealed. Mark Ellison would later struggle to describe it. It was not fear. It was not panic. It was simply a detail that did not match expectation. He had been inside dozens of structures during combat operations. Each one had its own sound. Old buildings creaked. Concrete stairwells carried footsteps upward. Doors rattled under pressure. This building absorbed sound. The assault element moved toward the upper floors. The objective had already been confirmed. The target was down. Now the focus shifted to intelligence collection. The stairwell to the second floor was narrow. Concrete steps, plain walls, standard construction. Nothing unusual at first glance, yet the further they moved inside, the more the outside world seemed to fade. Even the air felt heavier. Comms checks continued at regular intervals. All stations, status. Green, green, green. No hesitation, no confusion, still. There was a shared awareness among the men, not spoken, not acknowledged, just present. The building did not feel like an active residence. It felt contained, as if something inside it was holding its breath. On the second floor, rooms were cleared methodically. Chem lights marked secured spaces, green for clear, red for casualties. Standard procedure. At the end of the hallway was a room assigned for exploitation. According to pre-mission intelligence, it was supposed to be a personal workspace. Just another room to document. Nothing more. Ellison's fire team stacked at the door. Positions set, weapons angled, entry controlled. The handle turned easily, unlocked. The door opened slowly. From the hallway, it looked ordinary, empty, quiet. But the moment they stepped inside, something felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong in a way that took a second longer than it should have to process. And in operations like this, a single second is everything. The room was supposed to be simple. A second-floor Western room, a personal workspace, papers, devices, maybe a hard drive hidden in a drawer. That was the expectation. That was what the layout said. But the moment Mark Ellison stepped through the doorway, he felt the picture break. At first, it was hard to explain. The lighting under night vision was normal. The walls were painted white. The air was still. No movement, no people, no immediate threat. Yet the room did not feel like it belonged inside the building. It felt larger. Ellison had studied the compound measurements. Everyone had. The exterior dimensions were clear. The western wall of the building was not far from the hallway. The space should have ended where the outer wall ended. But this room kept going. It stretched back far deeper than it should have. Twice the depth, maybe more. And the ceiling was too high, higher than the structure above could allow. It was not a small mistake. It was a physical, contradiction. Ellison didn't announce it right away. Operators do not jump to conclusions. They verify, they check. They look for the simple answer first. Maybe it was a hidden extension, a false wall, a clever interior build. But nothing about it looked newly built. The room felt old. Dust hung in the air like it had been untouched for a long time. Not the light dust of a week, not even a month. Thick dust. The kind that settles when a room sits undisturbed. That made no sense. This was an occupied compound. Lights, people, daily movement. But the dust suggested abandonment. Along one wall stood filing cabinets, 7 of them. Old metal cabinets, the kind found in government offices. Dull, scratched, heavy. And they looked out of place in a compound like this. Not because filing cabinets were strange, but because these looked like they belonged somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere official. In the center of the room was a desk, large, solid. The kind of desk that doesn't get moved once it's placed. Its surface was covered with papers, but those papers were pinned down by stones, not paperweights, stones. Smooth, rounded river stones, 7 of them, spaced out in a deliberate pattern. Ellison counted without realizing he was counting. It felt automatic, like his brain was trying to lock onto something stable. 7 cabinets, 7 stones. The pattern bothered him more than it should have. Not because it was scary, but because it felt intentional, like a setup, like a message. The room was empty of people, but it was not empty, and the deeper Ellison looked, the more he realized this room was not just a workspace. It was a storage place, a controlled space, a place where something was being kept. The procedure was clear. Photograph everything before touching it. Ellison lifted his tactical camera, and began documenting the room exactly as it stood. The desk, the stones, the cabinets, every angle, every detail. That was how exploitation worked. You created a record before you disturbed anything. Then the cabinets were opened. The first drawer slid out smoothly. No lock, no resistance. That was unusual. High-value intelligence was normally secured, locked, hidden, encrypted, especially inside a compound built to avoid detection. But these drawers opened easily. Inside were folders, dozens of them, each one neatly labeled, in English. That was the first detail that didn't fit. Not Arabic, not Urdu, not coded shorthand, clean English typing on plain labels. Ellison leaned closer to read the dates. Some of them went back decades. 1954, 1955, 1956. That made no sense. Al-Qaeda did not exist in 1918. Osama bin Laden had not even been born for decades. Yet the files were organized by dates that stretched far beyond the timeline of modern terrorism. Another drawer was opened, more English labels, but now the names were different. Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin. Ellison paused. Those were not targets, not allies, not operational contacts. They were historical leaders. There was no clear connection to the mission, no obvious link to extremist networks. Inside one of the folders were photographs, black and white images, old ones, soldiers standing in formations that looked unnatural, groups arranged in geometric patterns around open ground, dig sites, desert locations, military uniforms from different eras. They did not look like intelligence gathered by a terrorist leader hiding in Pakistan. They looked archived, preserved, documented with care. The deeper the team moved into the cabinets, the less the material resembled operational intelligence, and the more it resembled records. Records of events that spanned generations. Each drawer held the same structure. Dates, names, locations, decades apart, different countries, no clear theme, except that everything felt connected by something unseen. The unease in the room began to grow. Not panic, not fear, but the awareness that they were looking at something that did not belong in this building. Then the last cabinet was opened. The bottom drawer stuck for a moment before releasing. Inside was a single file, larger than the others, thicker. It looked heavier. The label was simple. Continuation. No date, no name, just one word. Ellison watched as it was lifted from the drawer. The weight was wrong, too heavy for paper alone, and whatever was inside it felt different from the historical folders surrounding it. The room, already quiet, seemed to press inward. The silence returned, and this time it felt deliberate. The file labeled Continuation was opened carefully. Inside were photographs, but they were not old. They were modern, glossy prints, high resolution, the kind produced by advanced digital systems, not something pulled from a basic printer inside a hidden compound. The images were aerial shots, cities, government buildings, industrial zones, coastlines, military facilities. The clarity was unmistakable. This was satellite-level imagery, the kind only major governments could access, the kind that required clearance. Ellison recognized some of the locations immediately. The Pentagon, a rebuilt section of Lower Manhattan, an embassy compound overseas. These were not random targets. They were sensitive sites. But what made the room colder was not the locations. It was the writing. Each photograph had a date written in careful handwriting along the bottom edge. Not past dates, future dates, years ahead of 2011, precise days, exact months, No question marks. No approximations. Just clean, confident annotations. The commanding officer stepped forward and studied the pages in silence. His expression changed, not into fear but into calculation. He gave a quiet order. Seal this separately. No debate, no discussion. The file was placed into a separate evidence bag and marked for restricted handling, above clearance level. The rest of the cabinets were secured quickly after that, but the room was not done. Ellison returned to the desk to photograph the stone arrangement one last time. As he leaned closer, he noticed something on the wall behind it. Under the yellowed paint, there was texture, not cracks, patterns. He adjusted the light and looked again. Beneath the surface layer were symbols carved into the original wall, hundreds of them, interlocking shapes, repeating designs. The same geometry that appeared in the old photographs. The camera struggled to focus. The autofocus shifted back and forth, unable to lock cleanly onto the surface. Ellison took several shots anyway. When he lowered the camera, something else caught his eye. The stones. They were no longer in the same pattern. He had memorized their position while documenting the desk. 7 stones arranged unevenly. Now they sat in a perfect circle. No one had touched them. No one had moved past the desk. The air in the room felt thinner. Ellison glanced toward the window at the far end. For a brief second, he saw something in the reflection. A tall shape standing behind him. Still. Too still. He turned immediately. There was nothing there. Just the empty room and the silence. Waiting. There was no time to analyze what they had seen. The timeline still ruled everything. Charges had already been placed on the downed Black Hawk in the courtyard. Sensitive technology could not be left behind. Not for Pakistani forces. Not for anyone else. As the team moved out of the building, the courtyard lit up in orange. The explosion was controlled but powerful. Metal twisted. Heat rolled through the night air. The fireball rose above the compound walls and turned the darkness into daylight for a few seconds. Then it was over. The team pushed through the breach point and moved toward the extraction zone. A backup Chinook arrived on schedule. Rotors cutting the air, dust lifting from the ground. The document bags were loaded first, then the team. As the aircraft lifted off, Ellison looked down at the compound one last time. Emergency lights had kicked in around the structure. In that brief moment of visibility, something stood out. The garden on the western side. Though plants were not randomly placed. From above, they formed a shape, the same uneven pattern as the stones on the desk. 7 points. Slightly irregular. The same geometry carved beneath the paint in that room. The Chinook gained altitude. Abbottabad shrank below them. Within minutes, they were out of Pakistani airspace. The flight to Jalalabad was quiet. Normal procedures resumed. Weapons checked. Gear accounted for. No one spoke about the room. They landed just after 3 a.m. But something felt different on the tarmac. There were additional personnel waiting. Not standard base staff. Not just security. Civilians in suits. They stood near the edge of the floodlights, already positioned before the aircraft touched down. As soon as the ramp lowered, they stepped forward. They did not ask questions. They did not congratulate the team. They requested custody of the materials. Immediately. The commanding officer hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The document bags, dena, were handed over without inventory review. Then one of the civilians turned toward Ellison. "Your camera." It was not a request. The camera was surrendered. No explanation was given. The civilians walked away into the darkness with the files and the only visual record of that room. By morning, the official version of the mission was already forming, and the room on the second floor was not part of it. The official debrief took place hours later. It focused on timelines, entry points, angles of approach, confirmation of the target. Everything was clean, structured, precise. When the conversation reached the exploitation phase, Ellison described the cabinets, the desk, the additional file. The debriefer did not react. He redirected. Focus on tactical movement. When the subject of the room's size came up, how it extended beyond the expected dimensions, the answer was simple. Your photographs are being reviewed. When Ellison mentioned the satellite images with future dates, the response was smoother. That material is above your clearance level. No one challenged him. No one confirmed it either. The room was not denied. It was bypassed. After returning home, Ellison followed procedure. He checked supply records regarding the confiscated camera. There was no entry, no record of it being collected, no replacement issued, no acknowledgement that he had ever carried one during the operation. The files were the same. In classified summaries, the materials recovered from the compound were described as standard operational intelligence. Hard drives, correspondence, network data, nothing else. Months later, a public architectural survey of the compound surfaced after the structure was demolished. Measurements were published. The second floor western room was listed as 12 feet by 14 feet. Exactly what the exterior walls allowed. No extensions, no extra depth, no impossible dimensions. Ellison approached his commanding officer privately. The conversation was short. The commander confirmed what Ellison already knew. The room had been larger, not slightly larger, significantly larger. But the official record would not reflect that. There would be no correction, no clarification, just silence. The room did not officially exist in the form they experienced. The files did not officially exist. The camera never existed. The mission report was complete, and anything outside its structure was quietly removed. Time moved on. The mission became history. Speeches were given. Books were written. The world treated the operation as a closed chapter. For Ellison, it wasn't. The memory of the continuation file stayed clear in his mind. He had only seen the pages for a few seconds, but the dates were sharp. Trauma has a way of carving details into memory. 16 dates, all in the future. The first one passed quietly. It was a small industrial fire in Europe, a warehouse owned by a logistics company. Minor damage, no casualties. It barely made international news. But the date matched. Exactly. Ellison told himself it was coincidence. The world is large. Events happen every day. Then the second date arrived. A power failure in a financial district overseas. 4 hours of blackout. Official cause, equipment malfunction. Again minor. Again the date matched. The third incident was a maritime accident. 2 ships colliding in restricted waters. Contained quickly. Little coverage. The date was exact. By the time the 4th and 5th events occurred, the pattern was harder to ignore. None of them were global catastrophes. None of them reshaped history. That was almost more unsettling. They were precise, controlled, specific. Ellison began tracking them privately. One by one, the dates passed, and one by one, something happened on each of them. He wasn't the only one watching. A former teammate reached out late one evening. "You're seeing it too," the teammate said. It wasn't a question. They compared notes. 16 total dates had been written in that file. By the 7th year after the raid, more than half had already occurred. Every single one matched the day written beneath the satellite images. No early triggers, no delays, no close guesses. Exact days. Ellison tried to explain it logically. Maybe the images were old surveillance material later connected to known risk assessments. Maybe the events were staged responses to classified intelligence. But the timing was too precise. 13 years after the raid, the 15th date passed, then the 16th, the final one. A small incident at a research facility in Nevada, contained quickly, barely reported. But it happened on the exact date, written in that room in 2011, 16 out of 16. The file labeled continuation had not been guessing. It had been documenting, and whatever had been written in that room had unfolded exactly as recorded. That was when the silence returned, and this time it felt closer. A few years after the raid, there was a knock on Ellison's door. It was late afternoon, quiet neighborhood. Nothing unusual. 2 men stood outside, calm, professional, suits but not flashy. They showed identification from a federal office connected to defense operations. They did not ask about the target. They asked about the room. Not directly. They asked if he had experienced anything unusual since the mission. Strange patterns, recurring thoughts, an interest in certain dates. Ellison kept his answers controlled. The men did not push. Before leaving, one of them handed him a small white card. No agency name, no title, just a phone number. "If anything continues," one of them said, "call this." Ellison paused at the wording. "Continues?" The agent nodded once. "Continuity." Then they left. Years passed again. The final predicted date arrived. August 23rd, 2024. A minor containment incident at a research facility in Nevada. Short-lived. Quietly. Handled. Barely mentioned in national headlines. But it happened. On the exact day, written beneath that satellite image 13 years earlier. 16 out of 16. After that, there were no more dates, no more predictions. Just silence. Ellison has often wondered what that room truly was. A storage space, a research site, a place built to hold information that should not exist yet, or something else entirely. Sometimes he wonders if the raid was only partly about the target. Maybe the room was meant to be accessed. Maybe the files were meant to be removed. Maybe the continuation required witnesses. The card with the phone number is still in his wallet. He has never called it. But some nights, when the house is quiet, he thinks about that word, continuity. The silence inside that room did not feel empty. It felt aware. And even now, long after the final date has passed, it sometimes feels like that silence is still listening.